We'd all like to be able to make perfect fly casts every time we go out fishing, but that doesn't happen. We all make casting flaws and they cause problems, and that's what we want to talk about in this segment. Most of the common casting flaws that we run into have to do with the casting arc and inappropriate casting arc. So to explain what the casting arc is simply the angle change of the rod when we make a cast. So I'm going to start and make a back cast from here. I'm going to go to here. That angle change is the casting arc. So there to there, that's the casting arc. Now it can be wide. This is a very wide casting arc, or it can be very narrow. This is a very narrow casting arc, but that's the casting arc. So now, the flaws. Most common one is one that's often called wristing, and it's simply bending the wrist too much. If I bend my wrist too much, the casting arc becomes very wide. When the casting arc is very wide, my rod tip is very low in the front, and it's low in the back, but it's going to be very high in the middle. That means my tip path is a big upward curve, and when I do that, when I cast that way, I end up with the top leg of my loop that's a big upward curve. I end up with a big open loop like this that's very wind resistant, and no matter how hard I throw it, it always comes down in a pile. So what we want is the loop to be much straighter, the top leg to be straight, and I can easily make that happen if I simply take this very wide casting arc and I start to narrow it up. You can see how the loop is changing, and now I've got my casting arc just about right for this cast, and you can see the change in the loop, and this loop will deliver very nicely. So that's one, simply a casting arc that's too wide for the amount we bend the rod. Now, the next most common casting flaw that we see, and everybody has this problem, if you've ever had a knot in your leader, then you've done this, and it's called creep. Now when I cast, my casting arc ends here and ends here at the other end. When I wait, I have to wait for the loop to straighten behind me before I move forward. Creep is this, and I want you to just watch the butt of the rod. I'll demonstrate it static for a minute. If I stop the rod while I'm waiting for the rod line to straighten, if I move the rod forward, I've narrowed my casting arc. Now it's too narrow, and I'll end up with another flaw called the tailing loop, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm going to stop the rod in the right place, then I'm going to creep the rod forward, and then I'm going to make a very powerful cast because my stroke is very short after that. Creep, and then pop. And you can see the tailing loop. That's where the top leg dips down below the bottom leg. There it is again. I stop, creep the rod forward, and then I hit it hard. There's creep, tailing loop. Sometimes the line hits the rod, but that's what creep looks like. Stop, creep forward, and then you pop the power and you end up with a tailing loop. Very troublesome. Tangles, sometimes hits the rod, often ties knots in your leaders. Now the last flaw that we run into very, very commonly, a lot of really good casters do this one, and that's just applying the force or the power to the rod inappropriately. If I want to bend this rod right to make the good cast, I need to bend it in a very constant way so that we can get a straight line tip path, and that gives us the really nice loop we want. And to do that, I would need to, if I'm going to start my forward cast from here, I want to accelerate at the same rate right from there all the way to there. That bends the rod right and makes a really nice loop. Now this last flaw is if someone is here and they're ready to make their next cast and they accelerate very slowly through the first part of their stroke, and then they realize they're going too slow and they have to give it a hard shot at the end. It's very, very common. A lot of casters do that, but it causes the same loop that creep does, which is a tailing loop, and it looks like this. I'm going to make my back cast. I'm going to wait the right amount of time. I'm not going to move the rod. And then when it's time for me to cast, I come forward slowly and I hit it hard at the end. Here it is in real time. And you can see a tailing loop forms. Here it is again. Pop. 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 If I just cast smoothly and I accelerate all the way through at the same rate, I get a much nicer loop, and I don't get knots in my leaders, and I don't hit the fly on the rod, and it's a much better result. Those are the most common casting flaws.